I never thought that walking into Johns Hopkins ICU would end with me hiding behind a utility door, clutching my chest like it might split open. I had run every red light from Park Heights to East Baltimore. The sun had turned a tired, low gold when I pulled into the garage, 3:17 p.m., October 12, 2024, flashing on the dashboard like an omen. I barely looked at the security guard. "My son," I said breathlessly at the reception desk. "Jacob R. McKinley, room 405. The nurse behind the counter froze mid-click. A young woman, early 30s, with a neat badge that read Crystal, RN 44832, blinked up at me. "You're his mother?" she asked, almost a whisper. "Yes, please, I need to see him." She stood. "Follow me, but stay low. And whatever happens, do not go inside. Just trust me." She didn't wait for an answer. I followed her down the polished hallway, heart pounding in time with each fluorescent hum above us. The smell, disinfectant, something citrusy and sharp, coated my tongue. At the end of the corridor, Crystal stopped short of room 405 and opened a utility door. "Here," she said. "Stay here." I stepped into the tight space, mop buckets, paper towel boxes, a fan humming in the corner, and pulled my scarf up over my head. She shut the door, but it didn't latch all the way. Through the crack, I could see a corner of Jacob's room. I waited. Footsteps, heels on linoleum. Then the door to 405 opened. I tilted forward, heart in my throat. It was her, Melanie. My daughter-in-law's voice drifted down the hallway, too bright, too rehearsed. "Okay, now we're all set," she said to someone else. A man, maybe 50, in a charcoal suit and brown shoes. He nodded at her clipboard. I squinted toward the glow of Jacob's heart monitor, and then my eyes hit the screen she was scrolling. For only a second. EHR Note DNR, signed by Melanie R. The screen shifted before I could read more. I pressed back against the wall. My hand went to my chest. Jacob wasn't supposed to have a DNR. Not without me. Not unless I was dead. Crystal had known. That's why she'd told me to hide. That's why her fingers had trembled, just barely, when she held the door. A soft voice from the room. "The power of attorney is active, right?" Melanie asked. "We'll move the money once it clears." The door clicked shut again, and just like that, the ground beneath me was gone. 10 minutes passed in that narrow, airless closet, though it felt like longer. I stayed silent, scarf pulled tight over my head, blending into the shadowed racks of surgical gloves and gauze packs. A stray box of saline toppled beside my foot and made a dull thud, but no one heard. My knees ached, but I didn't dare shift. I had to know what I wasn't supposed to. Melanie's voice filtered through the wall again, too sweet to be honest. "Jacob's signature is on file. The power of attorney's valid as of last month." Her words were clipped and confident, like someone delivering a rehearsed monologue. "So yes, we can initiate the transfer today. I've already confirmed the routing info with the bank." I leaned closer to the sliver of light from the cracked door. I couldn't see much, just the edge of Jacob's bed and the man's crisp gray pants. His briefcase, resting on a rolling tray, looked expensive, something corporate, not medical. "Once the accounts move into my name," Melanie continued, "we can close the joint account and liquidate the CDs. The less movement in his name, the better, especially with the DNR in place." My stomach turned. I covered my mouth with one trembling hand. I'd only come to see my son, to hold his hand, to whisper that I loved him. I hadn't expected to hear his wife talk about his money like he was already gone. They were treating him like a ledger, a transaction. No mention of his recovery. No questions about the prognosis. Just bank accounts, transfers, signatures. I wanted to burst in, demand answers, drag Melanie by her carefully flat-ironed hair out into the hallway, and make her say it again, to my face. But something held me back. Not fear, exactly. A calculation. I didn't have proof yet, not real proof, just fragments, so I stayed where I was, When they finally left the room, their heels echoing down the corridor, I pressed my back against the metal cabinet and stared at the floor, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just about Jacob being sick. It was about someone trying to make him disappear. A week before I found myself crouched in that hospital closet, everything still felt ordinary, at least on the surface. I remember the way the sun poured into my kitchen that morning, low and warm through the east-facing window, glinting off the glass jars on the counter. The kind of Baltimore October morning that smelled like burnt leaves and distant chimney smoke. I had just come back from Eddie's Market on Roland Avenue, carrying 2 heavy bags of groceries, mostly for them. Jacob loved the mango nectar they stocked. The glass bottles with gold foil caps, not the cheap ones in the plastic jugs. I had bought 4. He used to drink it straight from the fridge when he visited, laughing that it was the only thing that could pull him out of a bad day. I thought maybe if I stocked the fridge at their place with things that made him happy, he'd start smiling more again. The total came to $302. A little more than usual, but I'd picked up the good salmon and some of that expensive almond granola Melanie liked to post about in her gut health stories. After unpacking everything into the reusable bags, I sat down at the kitchen table and sent her a text. Just left the groceries by the back door. How's Jacob doing today? Anything else you need me to bring next time? I checked my phone an hour later. No response. By evening, still nothing. I sent another. Let me know how the appointment went, sweetie. Just want to hear his voice. I never did. The messages stayed unread. No blue check marks. No call. I told myself maybe her phone was off, or maybe they were just busy. But something in my gut twisted that night as I stared at my screen, watching the time tick past midnight. Even then, something had shifted. I just didn't want to name it. It was easier to keep playing the part. One knew, groceries, errands, silence. That quiet, cloying role of the mother who gives without asking, waiting to be needed again. But I was beginning to feel like I was buying my own distance. Before she was the woman whispering about transfers and DNRs behind a hospital curtain, Melanie had once sat at my dining table in Park Heights, all doe-eyed and hopeful. It was March of 2019. The dogwood outside the window had just begun to bloom, white petals dusting the sidewalk like confetti. Jacob had brought her over for dinner, grilled chicken, collard greens, skillet cornbread, and she'd complimented every bite, called me Ms. Marion with a kind of rehearsed sweetness I mistook for sincerity. She was sharp, that was clear, full of ambition, talked about her digital wellness brand like it was already the next big thing. She said her app would bridge the mental health gap for Black millennials. She said she just needed a small infusion to get through beta testing, enough to pay her developer and renew the LLC. She made it sound like I'd be part of something noble. I didn't even hesitate. We sat down at this same table, she and I, 2 weeks later. She brought the loan documents in a manila folder, all printed neat and marked where I needed to sign. I remember her freshly done nails tapping the edge of the paperwork, her voice low and persuasive. Just until I get traction, Ms. Marion. Jacob believes in it. I promise. 6 months, tops. I signed on the dotted line. A $25,000 personal loan co-signed by me, issued through Fulton Credit Union. My banker, Mr. Elgin, called me before finalizing it. Are you sure about this? He asked. It's unsecured. She's family now. I told him. And sometimes, family needs you to believe in them. I can still see the look he gave me, sitting behind his polished desk, the hum of the Liberty Road branch ATM filling the background. He didn't press further, just nodded, typed a few things, and handed me the signed copy I still keep in my file drawer. Third folder on the left, labeled Jacob and Melanie. I told myself it was an investment in their future, that helping them get started was part of being a mother-in-law. But some debts never come with payment plans. I sat in my home office the night before the ICU, not knowing the scale of what was coming, but already feeling the weight of something cracking open. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the space heater under the desk. Outside, wind rustled the last dry leaves against the window pane. I was supposed to be asleep, but instead I was surrounded by receipts, transfer confirmations, check stubs, all of it spread across my old dining chair like a confession. I had started compiling the numbers earlier that week, half out of worry and half out of a need to reclaim something I hadn't realized was slipping. Melanie's silence, the unread messages, the growing gap between Jacob's voice and my access to it, it had all set something in motion. Not rage exactly, more like a reckoning. There was the $25,000 loan, of course, but that was just the headline. What filled the pages were smaller, more consistent sacrifices that didn't look like generosity at first glance. A $600 utility bill from 2020 when the heating went out. A series of $1,200 wire transfers during the pandemic, labeled emergency groceries. The $4,800 I'd paid toward their car note the year Jacob was in between jobs. An $850 dental bill Melanie had handed me one morning like it was an invitation to brunch. She's in so much pain, Marian. I just don't want her to wait. And the gifts. Christmases, birthdays, anniversaries. Nothing extravagant, just endless. $200 here, a $300 spa gift card there. New laptop when Melanie's crashed, $1,100. I found the Best Buy receipt tucked in an envelope labeled Miss Key. Even their weekend trips. Jacob once asked if I could cover an Airbnb just this once so they could unwind, $472. Altogether, I'd charted out $62,400 in 5 years. $62,400. Money I could have put toward repairs on this house, toward my own medical plan, toward a vacation I never took. Money I thought was cementing me into their lives. Instead, it had built me a silence I now had to dig my way out of. I sat back, staring at the ledger I'd made, drawn in neat columns on yellow legal paper. For once, it wasn't guilt I felt. It was clarity. They hadn't needed me to mother. They'd needed me to fund. 2 weeks before I found myself pressed against the cold metal of a hospital supply cabinet, I had tried to visit Jacob. Just a visit. No agenda, no drama, just a mother wanting to see her son. It was a Thursday morning, the air sharp with that brittle edge October sometimes carries. I had booked an Uber, dressed in my softest cardigan, and packed a small bag with his favorite things. The lavender lotion he always said helped him sleep, a tattered paperback of Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, and a CD he loved, gospel classics sung by Mahalia Jackson. I'd even tucked in a handwritten note just in case he was too tired to talk. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. It was Melanie. Too much stress isn't good for him. Just rest. He's not up for visitors. The words blinked on my screen, cold and sanitized. No greeting, no thank you, just an order dressed up as concern. I stared at it, rereading the message again and again, hoping there was something else beneath it. Some softness, some hint that she still saw me as part of Jacob's healing. But there was nothing. Just that curt dismissal, like I was an item to be rescheduled. My driver, a kind man with gospel playing low in the background, asked if everything was okay. I didn't want to explain. I asked him to turn around. We rode back in silence, save for the gentle hum of voices from the stereo. I watched the city blur by. The sidewalks of Druid Hill and Reservoir Hill lined with changing trees, and thought about how many times I'd made this ride before. Birthdays, emergencies, dinners, little drop-offs Melanie never acknowledged. When I got home, I left the bag of items on the hallway bench. It sat there for days, untouched, like some kind of offering to a house of gods that no longer heard my prayers. That text, small as it was, felt like a lock clicking shut. A barrier drawn without discussion. I told myself maybe she was trying to protect Jacob, but deep down, I knew. She wasn't managing his care, she was managing access. And I had just been denied. By the time I went back to the hospital, it was no longer about a visit. I needed clarity, answers. A place in the room where my son lay, tethered to wires and machines I hadn't even been allowed to see. I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I had spent too many years stepping carefully around Melanie's boundaries to be accused of drama, but I was his mother, his blood, and I needed someone official to tell me why I had been pushed aside. The social worker's office was just past the nurse's station on the fourth floor, a small room with pale walls and motivational quotes pinned beside fire safety posters. The woman inside was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, with soft curls and eyes that kept darting to the clock. Her badge read Ms. Lavelle, MSW. I introduced myself quietly and explained who I was. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yes, Mrs. McKinley. We have you in the system, but as of now, your son's medical access is restricted. His wife has signed the forms listing herself as next of kin, and she's opted for no outside visitors. I sat perfectly still. But I'm his mother. He'd want me there. I understand. But legally, she has the authority unless otherwise stated. Her voice was sympathetic, but final. I asked to see the documentation, and she pulled it up on the screen. Next of kin, Melanie R. McKinley. No visitation authorized beyond spouse. My mouth went dry. It didn't matter that I had changed his diapers, taught him to read, stayed up nights when his asthma flared. It didn't matter that I had held him through heartbreaks and college rejection letters. In that moment, I was nobody. When I stood to leave, Ms. Lavelle offered a printed pamphlet about family stress in medical emergencies. I didn't take it. Walking back down that hallway, I passed Jacob's room. I stopped, just for a second, and stared at the closed door. My reflection blinked back at me in the glass panel. Older, wearier, but not yet broken. She had written me out of his care plan like a line in a contract, and I was starting to realize just how far ahead she'd planned this. 2 days before I found myself hiding behind that utility door, I tried one last time to reach Jacob the way I always had, through comfort, through memory. I arrived at Johns Hopkins carrying a small tote bag and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, familiarity would soften the lines that had hardened between us. Inside the bag was the gospel CD I'd made years ago for his birthday, with hand-picked songs, Mahalia, The Soul Stirrers, a few tracks from the Mighty Clouds of Joy, music that got us through his father's funeral, that calmed him during college midterms, that once made him weep on the drive back from his best friend's wedding. Music that had always reminded him who he was and where he came from. I never made it past the main lobby. Security met me at the front desk. 2 officers, polite but unyielding. One of them, a young man named Marcus with kind eyes, lowered his voice as if he were speaking to a stranger with fragile dignity. Ma'am, there's a note on the file. Immediate family only. No deliveries, no unscheduled visits. I am his immediate family, I said, barely above a whisper. I'm his mother. I understand, he replied gently. But Mrs. McKinley, Melanie, submitted a directive with hospital administration. It's filed under his patient status. My hands trembled as I reached into my bag and pulled out the CD case. I'm not here to make trouble. I just wanted him to have this. Officer Marcus looked at it for a long moment, then shook his head. I'm sorry. I really am. People walked past us. Nurses in scrubs, families clutching takeout bags, someone laughing on a phone call. The world kept moving, unaware that I had just been erased from my son's life in plain view, like chalk washed from a sidewalk. I turned and left, keeping my shoulders high, but inside I was unraveling. That CD never made it past the lobby. It stayed in my purse, scratched at the corner where the case had cracked. A relic of something I could no longer reach. That was the day I stopped hoping Melanie would soften. She wasn't guarding Jacob, she was sealing him off. And I was now an intruder. The night before I found myself inside that supply closet, I received a voicemail from Melanie that was so calm, so deliberately measured, it took me nearly an hour to understand what wasn't being said. I was in bed, the TV casting a flickering blue glow against the wall, though I hadn't been watching. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the silence had taken on a kind of pressure, like something was closing in. I hadn't heard from Jacob in days. Not a call, not a message, not even a second-hand update. When my phone finally buzzed, I scrambled to grab it, heart pounding. Hi, Marion, just wanted to check in and give you a quick update. Jacob's stable. No need to worry, he's resting, and the doctors say everything is under control. We'll keep you posted. If anything changes, okay? Talk soon. That was it. No greeting, no warmth. Just the sterile efficiency of someone managing a situation she didn't want complicated. Her tone was honeyed at the edges, but behind it, I could hear it. The tightening. The script. It was the voice of someone used to performance, practiced in the art of sounding caring, while offering nothing of substance. I replayed the message twice more, each time catching a new detail. The way she paused before saying, we. The way she emphasized under control, the absence of Jacob's voice, even in the background. I sat up in bed, the unease I'd been trying to silence for days rising fast and sharp. There was something she was managing, something more than just his care. She was too composed, too polished, like someone who'd rehearsed their alibi. Outside, the street lamp buzzed against the autumn air, casting long shadows over my porch steps. I stood and stared out the window, phone still in hand, pulse steady now. Not from calm, but from cold understanding. She wasn't just keeping me away. She was building a version of reality where I didn't exist. And Jacob, somewhere behind those locked hospital doors, had no idea. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, the voicemail playing over and over like a lullaby with poison in its chords. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay passive any longer. I brewed coffee in the dark kitchen, the gurgling drip a thin comfort against the heaviness settling in my chest. The voicemail had kept playing in my head all night, not just the words, but the tone. That hollow smoothness of someone narrating over a story she didn't want me to read. I opened the message again, but this time I wasn't listening. I was dissecting, analyzing the spaces between words, the turns of phrase. And then it hit me. Our shared property. It slipped out so casually I almost missed it the first 3 times. But there it was, buried in the last 10 seconds of the message. Not Jacob's, not his and mine. She said our shared property like it was already hers, fully absorbed, like the ink had dried. I played it back again, slower, clearer now. Her voice lifted at that phrase, the way people do, when they're claiming something out loud, planting a flag. I walked to the credenza near the front door, where I kept a file organizer. Tucked behind years of church bulletins and old bills was a property tax envelope, one I had ignored weeks ago. I pulled it out and looked closely. The name field read, Jacob R. McKinley and Melanie R. McKinley, co-owners. It wasn't the house they lived in now. It was Jacob's condo in Mount Vernon, the one he bought before they were married. The one he told me was just in his name. I had helped him with the down payment back then, $15,000 from the life insurance his father left us. He promised he'd keep it separate, safe. This place will always be yours too, Ma, he once told me. But Melanie's name was on it now, printed clean and bold. I sat down slowly, the envelope crinkling under my fingers. It wasn't just about access. It was about acquisition. She had been absorbing everything, his accounts, his authority, his assets, while keeping me at arm's length, framing it as care. That morning, the grief turned into something colder. Not anger yet, but preparation. She wasn't just replacing me in Jacob's hospital room. She was trying to inherit him alive. By mid-morning, I was at Fulton Credit Union, the branches of the maple trees outside, casting fractured shadows across the sidewalk. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't want to. Some things couldn't wait for appointments. I needed to see Mr. Elgin. He'd been my banker for over a decade. Tall, careful, with a memory for details that always impressed me. I'd once joked he probably remembered more about my finances than I did. When he saw me through the glass, his face registered immediate concern. Mrs. McKinley, he said, rising from his chair before I even sat down. You all right? I slid the printout across the desk. It was a transaction alert from Jacob's joint account. $12,000 attempted withdrawal. Time-stamped 9:08 a.m. that very morning. I need to freeze the account, I said quietly. Effective immediately. Mr. Elgin adjusted his glasses and leaned in, reading the notice with a frown. This is a substantial move. Do you suspect fraud? I hesitated, choosing my words with care. I suspect something being done without Jacob's informed consent. He's in the ICU. I have reason to believe his financial access is being manipulated. He didn't ask by whom. He just nodded. Let me check the file. While he clicked through the digital records, I glanced around the office. Framed photos of his daughters, a jar of peppermint sticks on the filing cabinet, the same Boston fern that had been drooping since spring. Ordinary things. But they felt like anchors in that moment. Evidence of a world still governed by rules, by process. Mr. Elgin turned the screen toward me. There were 3 attempts this morning. 2 declined, 1 pending. If we act now, we can lock the account before it clears. Do it, I said, my voice steady. He clicked a few keys and printed a confirmation form. Account 00478412 is now frozen. No activity without your direct approval, and will flag any attempt at access from here forward. I signed the paper without hesitation. As I stood to leave, Mr. Elgin met my gaze. You're doing the right thing, he said gently. I've seen too many people wait until it's too late. I nodded once. She thought she'd moved in silence. But she just left a footprint in my son's account. From the bank, I drove straight to the public library on Edmondson Avenue. I hadn't stepped inside in over a year, but I remembered the layout well enough. The cool air, the quiet hum of computers, the faint scent of paper and old carpet. It was one of the few places left where no one asked questions, and where I could breathe while piecing together a truth I was no longer willing to ignore. I settled into a terminal tucked near the back, plugged in my flash drive, and began scanning everything. Bank statements, text screenshots, emailed receipts, notarized forms. Each document was like a tile, and I was starting to see the mosaic of Melanie's intentions. The file that chilled me most was the power of attorney form dated September 15, 2024. I stared at it under the harsh scan light, focusing on the signature. Jacob's name neatly written, but not in his handwriting. My breath caught. I opened my records from that same week. Flight confirmations, time-stamped emails, even a church bulletin with my name in the volunteer roster. I'd been in Georgia visiting my cousin Clara, and I remembered clearly because it had been Clara's 70th birthday, and I hadn't missed it for anything. That meant I wasn't present when the notary supposedly witnessed Jacob and me discuss this new POA. I found the original POA from 2021, the one I had been a part of, sitting in my home files until now. I scanned it next, putting both versions side by side on the screen. The signatures didn't match. The tone of the language didn't match. Even the notary's name, Ems, Rios, seemed familiar. And then I remembered. She worked here at the library on alternating Wednesdays. I found her behind the main desk, sorting returned books. Ms. Rios, I said softly, holding up a printout. Did you notarize this? She peered at the page, then at me, confusion slowly turning to concern. I've never met your son, she said, and I haven't notarized anything for Melanie McKinley. That was the last piece I needed. The initials on the form were fabricated. The date's impossible. The seal. Copied. I thanked her, tucked the scans into my folder, and walked out into the cool Baltimore afternoon. Melanie hadn't just silenced me. She had forged me. After the library, I drove to Mount Gilead Baptist, the church Jacob had grown up in. The sanctuary was empty, sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows in slanted bands of gold and red. Reverend Carter was in his office, reviewing sermon notes with a pair of reading glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up when I entered and saw the folder clutched in my hands. "Marian," he said gently, motioning for me to sit, "you look like someone carrying something heavy." I didn't respond right away. I just placed the folder on his desk, then pulled out my phone and played the voicemail again. Melanie's smooth delivery, her casual mention of shared property, her clipped update about Jacob's condition. He listened with his arms folded, his jaw tightening as the recording ended. "I need help," I said, my voice low. "Not just prayers, someone who sees this for what it is." He nodded slowly. "You have it." From there, I called Inez Bolton, a woman I'd met through a legal clinic at the community center. She specialized in elder law and probate, precisely the kind of quiet fighter one needed. I didn't mince words. I told her what I'd found: the forged power of attorney, the banking activity, the revoked visitation, the falsified notary seal. By 3:45 p.m., we were sitting in her office near Mondawmin Mall, the hum of traffic outside blending with the low tick of her wall clock. Ms. Bolton flipped through the copies I had made, pausing at the side-by-side signatures. "This alone warrants a motion to pause the power of attorney," she said firmly. "We'll file first thing in the morning. I'll include an affidavit of your location on September 15th and request an immediate investigation into the notarization." As we spoke, my phone buzzed again. A text from Melanie. "Leave us alone or I'll file for harassment." I showed it to Ms. Bolton, who took a screenshot, then printed it. "She just made this easier," she said, eyes sharp. "She's now attempting to intimidate a witness in an active dispute." We weren't just gathering evidence now. We were building a case, and Melanie, in her arrogance, had started leaving fingerprints all over it. 2 days later, I sat across from Ms. Bolton in her narrow office, a fresh stack of legal documents between us. The air smelled faintly of old ink and linoleum, and a small fan whirred in the corner, doing little to chase the heavy stillness from the room. The petition was ready, typed, signed, notarized, and submitted to the circuit court downtown. A formal request for medical access override, citing power of attorney obtained under potentially fraudulent circumstances. This wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was strategy. Ms. Bolton had included everything: copies of the conflicting signatures, a sworn affidavit placing me out of state during the signing, Ms. Rios' written statement confirming no such notarization occurred, and the bank reversal documentation showing the frozen joint account. It was a thick, airtight file, and we both knew it. While she reviewed the final cover letter, her assistant entered with a new envelope. "Just came through the firm's email," she said, eyes flicking between us. "It's from Melanie McKinley's attorney." Ms. Bolton opened it slowly. Her mouth pressed into a line as she read. "They're threatening defamation charges if you continue spreading unfounded allegations," she said, sliding the printed email toward me. "Typical scare tactic." The language was slick, all veiled warnings and rehearsed outrage. "My client has acted in good faith. Mrs. McKinley's behavior borders on harassment. We reserve the right to pursue legal remedy should these claims persist." I read it twice, then folded it in half and slid it back. "She's bluffing," I said. Ms. Bolton nodded. "Absolutely. But this confirms what we suspected. She knows she's exposed, and now she's trying to get you to retreat." I didn't flinch. There was a time when that kind of pressure would have made me second-guess everything. But not anymore. Not with so much already at stake. The truth was no longer private. It had names, dates, documents, and now witnesses. Let her call it defamation. Let her try to scare me quiet. I wasn't alone anymore, and I wasn't moving in the dark. This time, I had the law on my side, and she had just stepped into its light. The next morning, the hospital called me, not to inform, not to apologize, but to alert. "Mrs. McKinley, we thought you should know. Your daughter-in-law is here with a notary and a witness. She's requesting access to your son's room for legal documentation." My breath caught. "What kind of documentation?" The nurse hesitated. She mentioned real estate transfer forms. It felt like a gut punch. Whatever boundaries we had drawn, Melanie was now crossing them in ink. I told the nurse to hold the call. Then I dialed Crystal, nurse badge 44,832, the same one who had warned me to hide days before. "I need a favor," I said quietly. "I need eyes on room 405. She didn't hesitate. "I'm on shift. Give me 5 minutes." The next thing I knew, I had a video message in my inbox. Crystal had stood just outside Jacob's room, angled her phone discreetly, and hit record. The footage showed Melanie standing beside Jacob's bed, gently lifting his hand while a portable fingerprint scanner was placed against his thumb. A man in a blazer stood behind her, holding a clipboard. Melanie's voice was low, but clear. "Just relax, baby. This is just a formality. We're securing our future." Jacob was barely conscious. His eyes fluttered open for a second, then closed again. He didn't speak. He didn't resist. But he didn't consent either. The video was time-stamped, October 15th, 10:42 a.m., and that mattered. I forwarded it to Ms. Bolton, who called me back within minutes. "This is golden," she said. "He's nonverbal. There's no verbal confirmation, no signature. This could be ruled manipulation under duress. And the notary? I'll file a report with the Maryland Commission. If she submitted those forms, she's complicit." I sat in the parking lot outside the hospital, hands shaking, but not from fear. From the realization that Melanie wasn't just covering her tracks, she was accelerating, trying to lock things down before the courts could intervene. But now, we had more than signatures. We had proof, video, witness, intent. She had tried to make her move in a room filled with machines and silence. But the camera saw everything. And silence no longer meant consent. 2 days later, we walked into conference room B7 on the second floor of Johns Hopkins. It was cold, with paneled walls and a rectangular table too big for the room, as if built for more dignity than the space could hold. At one end sat a hospital legal representative, a note-taker from compliance, and Judge Walter Holden from the city's circuit court, called in on emergency order thanks to Ms. Bolton's petition. Melanie arrived 15 minutes late, dressed in ivory slacks and a camel coat, hair styled like she was coming to a photo shoot instead of a hearing. She didn't look at me. Instead, she sat beside a man she introduced as Jacob's cousin, Anthony. I hadn't seen Anthony in years, not since the funeral. And even then, he was more distant acquaintance than family. He nodded at no one in particular, eyes fixed on the table. Ms. Bolton opened with the timeline. She presented the forged POA, the bank reversal letter, the notary's written statement, and, finally, Crystal's video. As it played, the room fell into a dense, quiet wait. Melanie leaned forward once, perhaps realizing too late what had actually been captured. Judge Holden took notes throughout, his expression unreadable, tapping the pen against the pad only when the video ended. Then it was Melanie's turn. She stood, smoothed her blouse, and gestured toward Anthony. "Jacob and I discussed our plans months ago. This is all in alignment with what he wanted. Anthony can attest. He heard it directly." Anthony cleared his throat. "Yeah. Jacob told me, he was going to put everything in her name. Said she handled the business side of things." The judge looked over his glasses. "Did he say that before or after his hospitalization?" Anthony blinked. "Before, I think." "You think?" Ms. Bolton asked gently. He didn't respond. The judge turned to the hospital attorney. "Do you have record of Jacob giving active, recorded consent for this new POA or any property transfer?" "No, Your Honor," she replied. "And his current cognitive status renders him incapable of legal authorization." There it was, spoken, logged, and officially recognized. The hearing was no longer just about suspicion. It was about truth, and the room knew it. 1 hour into the hearing, it was my turn. Ms. Bolton handed me the floor with a small nod, and I rose, palms slightly damp, but spine straight. I placed a stack of documents in front of the judge, each carefully organized, each with a tab, a timestamp, a trail. First came the notarized logs. The original power of attorney Jacob and I signed in 2021, properly filed and witnessed. Next, the side-by-side comparison of the forged September 2024 version, including the statement from Ms. Rios, the notary who confirmed she'd never officiated that meeting. Then came the financials. I laid out 5 years of transfers, itemized spreadsheets of payments I made toward their shared bills, evidence of the $25,000 loan co-signed at Fulton Credit Union, and the account freeze confirmation from just days ago. Account number 004788412, locked after Melanie's failed $12,000 withdrawal attempt. I included the reversal letter from Mr. Elgin, confirming that suspicious activity had been flagged and stopped in time. Each sheet carried weight. Not just numbers, but proof of a pattern. One that the judge read through slowly, methodically, never rushing, as if absorbing the shape of exploitation. Finally, I placed my phone on the table, screen lit up, and played the voicemail one last time. Melanie's voice filled the room, clipped and falsely warm. Our shared property. When it ended, I looked directly at her. That wasn't a mistake. That was a signal. She wasn't informing me. She was rehearsing a claim. Melanie stood abruptly. "This is a vendetta," she snapped, eyes sharp. "She's bitter because Jacob chose me. This is personal, not legal." Judge Holden didn't flinch. "It becomes legal when financial control is obtained through forgery, and when incapacitated individuals are used to authorize transfers." Her face froze for the first time. He turned to Ms. Bolton. "The court accepts the evidence submitted. Until a full investigation is completed, all active power of attorney documentation is suspended. No further account activity, no property transfers, and no hospital directives initiated by Mrs. McKinley will be honored." The room held its breath for a beat. Then it exhaled. This wasn't a victory. Not yet. But it was a reckoning. And finally, the truth had been entered into the record. The following morning, I returned to the hospital, not as an outsider peering in from locked doors, but as someone re-established, recognized. Security met me in the main lobby just after 9 a.m. Officer T. Bishop, tall and steady, greeted me by name and handed me a plain white envelope. Inside were Jacob's new room keys, the access codes changed as of 7:42 a.m., and a printed notice, all prior authorizations revoked. Access restricted to designated medical proxy, Marion L. McKinley. It wasn't ceremony. It wasn't fanfare. But it was dignity returned. Upstairs, Melanie was already in room 405, standing near the window, arms crossed tightly. The moment she saw Officer Bishop, her expression shifted from defiant to uncertain. "This is harassment," she said, almost reflexively, eyes darting toward the nurse's station. "You have no right." "Yes, ma'am," Officer Bishop replied calmly. "We do. There's a court order on file. You're no longer authorized to make medical or financial decisions regarding Mr. McKinley. I'm his wife. You're not his guardian. Not anymore." Crystal was waiting at the desk. She didn't speak, but she gave me the smallest nod, just enough to remind me that quiet allies had always been there, tucked between the cracks of power and process. As Officer Bishop escorted Melanie from the floor, she didn't resist, she didn't cry. She just walked with stiff shoulders and a silence that now belonged to someone losing control. I stepped into Jacob's room after they left. The machine still beeped steadily, the same rhythm I'd heard in brief glimpses. He looked better, more color in his cheeks, less tension in his brow. I sat beside him, took his hand, and whispered, "You're safe now." Later that afternoon, Ms. Bolton texted, "POA formally voided. Documents filed. You're secured." Melanie's hospital access was terminated, her badge deactivated, her attempts to access Jacob's accounts legally blocked. The locks at their house in Hampton were changed by dusk, her name removed from the property management file. There was no celebration, no applause, just the quiet return of what had never belonged to her. Jacob's care, his future, our bond. I sat on my porch that night, new keys in my coat pocket, gospel playing low from my radio. Justice hadn't roared. It had arrived, measured, and documented.